My daughter screamed the moment she saw me, not the frightened cry of a child in pain, not the relieved sob of a little girl finally seeing her mother after months apart. A scream of absolute terror. "No, don't let her touch me," she cried, scrambling backward across the hospital bed despite the IV lines taped to her tiny arms. "Please, don't let her hurt me." Every nurse in the pediatric ICU turned toward us. My boots stopped moving. For a second, I honestly thought she didn't recognize me. Then I realized something much worse. She did. And somehow, she had been taught to fear me. A nurse gently placed herself between us, more out of instinct than accusation. I raised both hands immediately. "It's okay," I whispered, though my own voice barely worked. "I'm her mother." The words sounded foreign coming out of my mouth. Her mother. After 8 months away on a classified deployment overseas, that title suddenly felt like something I no longer deserved. My daughter buried her face into her pillow and cried harder. Behind me, the automatic doors opened again. "Lieutenant Colonel Harper." I turned. A gray-haired surgeon stood quietly in the hallway, his expression telling me everything before he ever spoke. "We should talk." 20 minutes earlier, I had been stepping off a military transport at Fort Liberty exhausted after the longest deployment of my career. The emergency message had reached me through the American Red Cross 2 days before. "Daughter hospitalized. Condition stable. Return authorized immediately." No details. No explanation. Just enough to make my heart pound through every connecting flight home. During the drive from base to Duke University Hospital, I kept imagining broken bones from a playground accident. Maybe appendicitis. A car crash. Children got hurt every day. I had spent years comforting soldiers whose lives changed in seconds. Surely I could handle whatever waited behind those hospital doors. I had been wrong. The surgeon led me into a consultation room and quietly closed the door. "I'm Dr. Michael Bennett." I nodded. "I've been treating your daughter since Sunday." I couldn't sit down. "Is she going to live?" "Yes." My knees nearly gave out. "But..." Every parent knows that word. It changes everything. Dr. Bennett opened her chart before sliding several x-rays across the table. "I need you to look at these." I stared at the images without understanding. He pointed carefully. "This fracture happened recently." Another. "This one is several weeks old." Another. "This one had already begun healing." He continued until my vision blurred. "There are multiple fractures," he said softly. "Different stages of healing." I couldn't breathe. "I don't understand." He lowered his voice. "This child was hurt more than once." The room became perfectly silent. "No, I'm very sorry." "No." He didn't argue. Instead, he opened another folder. Photographs. Bruises. Burn marks. Medical notes. Carefully documented evidence. Every page felt like another knife. There are indications of repeated physical abuse over several months. I stared at one photograph of my daughter's tiny wrist. It looked so impossibly small. I remembered holding that same hand while teaching her to cross the street. Now it was covered in bruises. "I was deployed," I whispered. "I know." "I wasn't here." "I know." The kindness in his voice somehow hurt even more. I should have been. He let the silence settle before speaking again. "Lieutenant Colonel, children often protect the people they love." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "When she first arrived, she kept insisting she'd fallen." He paused. "Then she changed her story." My stomach tightened. "What did she say?" "She said everything happened because she was bad." I closed my eyes. Somewhere inside me, something broke. A 7-year-old should never believe she deserved pain. After several minutes, Dr. Bennett gently asked, "Is there anyone you'd like us to call?" "No." "What about your husband?" "My husband brought her here." "Yes." "When?" "Sunday night." Today was Wednesday. He had known for 3 days. 3 days. And somehow no one had thought to tell me more than a single emergency message. I thanked the surgeon, though I barely remembered doing it, and walked back toward the ICU. I stopped outside my daughter's room. She had finally fallen asleep. Even through the glass, I could see the bruises peeking from beneath her hospital gown. Machines beeped steadily around her. A stuffed rabbit rested beside her pillow. I had mailed that rabbit from Germany 6 months earlier. She still slept with it. Tears threatened for the first time. I swallowed them. She needed a mother. Not another frightened child. I turned toward the waiting room. The smell of coffee reached me before the voices did. Then I saw them. My husband Daniel. His mother Gloria. Daniel leaned back comfortably in his chair, one ankle resting across his knee. Gloria laughed at something he'd just said while stirring cream into her coffee. They looked like two people waiting for a delayed flight, not the parents of a little girl lying in intensive care. Neither of them noticed me immediately. I simply stood there, watching, listening. Gloria smiled. "I told you hospital coffee isn't as terrible as people say." Daniel chuckled. "It's still better than army coffee." They laughed together. My hands curled into fists. Finally, Daniel looked up. "Oh, that was all he said." "Oh, not, thank God you're here. Not, she's asking for you. Just, oh." He stood slowly. "You made good time." I searched his face for panic, for guilt, for grief. I found none. "What happened to our daughter?" He looked toward his mother before answering. "She had some accidents." "Accidents? Kids fall?" Before I could respond, someone touched my elbow. I turned. A detective wearing a plain navy suit motioned quietly toward the hallway. "I'm Detective Ethan Morales." We stepped several feet away. He spoke so softly I almost couldn't hear him. "Mrs. Harper? It's Lieutenant Colonel Harper." He nodded respectfully. "Lieutenant Colonel." His eyes shifted briefly toward my husband. "I need you to understand something before we go any further." "What?" He hesitated. "They have people in high places." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means this family knows judges, politicians, business owners." He exhaled heavily. "Witnesses have already started changing statements." I felt something cold settle inside me. "So you're telling me no one plans to do anything?" "I'm telling you this case is going to be very difficult." Very difficult. Those words echoed in my head as I looked back through the ICU window. My little girl slept peacefully beneath warm blankets. She had trusted the people who were supposed to protect her. Instead, they had broken her. I rested one hand against the glass. At that moment, I stopped being a frightened mother. I became the most dangerous witness they had never expected. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the uncomfortable recliner beside my daughter's hospital bed. Not because of the endless beeping from the monitors. I stayed awake because every time my daughter drifted into a deeper sleep, she whimpered. Sometimes she whispered words I couldn't understand. Sometimes she cried without opening her eyes. Twice she begged someone to stop. The second time she reached for my hand. It happened so suddenly that I almost missed it. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine. "Mom." Her voice was barely louder than a breath. "I'm here, sweetheart." She didn't open her eyes. "You came back." "I promised I would." She squeezed my hand a little tighter before falling asleep again. I quietly lowered my head onto the edge of her mattress. That was the first time I cried. Not loudly. Just enough for the tears to soak into the hospital blanket where she couldn't see them. By sunrise, I had already made one decision. I wasn't leaving this hospital until I understood everything. The following morning, Dr. Bennett introduced me to the pediatric trauma psychologist assigned to my daughter's case. Her name was Dr. Melissa Grant. She had kind eyes that somehow managed to look both gentle and determined. "We don't force children to talk," she explained as we walked toward a small family consultation room. "We let them tell us when they're ready." "Has she said anything?" "A little." Dr. Grant opened a notebook. Nothing that could be considered a formal statement. She looked at me carefully. "But enough to concern us." I nodded. "Tell me." "She believes she caused all of this." The words landed harder than any punch I'd ever taken. "Children often blame themselves." "I know." "No," Dr. Grant said softly. "I don't think you do." She slid a drawing across the table. It was my daughter, a child's crayon drawing. There were 3 stick figures. One little girl. One woman wearing what looked like a dress. One man. The little girl stood alone. The adults stood together. "What does it mean?" Dr. Grant pointed toward a sentence written in uneven handwriting. "Mom loves the army more than me." I couldn't speak. Dr. Grant continued gently. "She believes you chose your job instead of choosing her." My hands trembled. I know. But someone has been telling her that for a long time. Every deployment. Every birthday I had missed. Every school play I had watched through grainy video calls. I had believed she understood. Someone had been rewriting every memory while I was gone. Later that afternoon, one of the nurses smiled when she saw my daughter watching cartoons. "She seems calmer today." "Because I'm here." The nurse hesitated. "I think so." Then she lowered her voice. "Yesterday she asked whether you'd be angry if she talked." My heart stopped. "What exactly did she say?" The nurse repeated it slowly. "Mom gets mad when I tell." I stared at her. "I have never laid a hand on my daughter." "I didn't think you had." "Then why would she say that The nurse looked toward the hallway. I don't think those were originally her words. That sentence echoed in my head all day. Not originally her words. Someone had planted them. Someone had repeated them until my little girl believed they belonged to her. 3 days later, Dr. Grant finally asked whether my daughter wanted to speak with me alone. She nodded. The psychologist left the room. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. She kept playing with the corner of her blanket. I waited. Finally, she whispered, "Are you really staying?" "As long as you need me." "You won't go back." I smiled gently. "I'll always come back." She looked at me with eyes far older than 7 years old. "Grandma said you only come back when people make you." My chest tightened. "What else did Grandma say?" Silence. "Then," she said, "soldiers don't love little girls." I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away this time. "Did you believe her?" "I tried not to." Another long pause. "But Daddy said the army needed you more." I closed my eyes for a second. Daniel, the man who had kissed me goodbye before every deployment, the man who had promised our daughter that Mommy was helping protect other families. Had he really spent months undoing every reassuring conversation we'd ever had? My daughter looked down. "I was good." "I know you were." "I cleaned my room." "I know." "I didn't complain." "I know, sweetheart." Her lips trembled. "So why was everyone still mad at me?" I felt my heart breaking piece by piece. "No one should ever have been mad at you." She looked confused. "But Grandma said—" "I know what Grandma said." I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. She was wrong. For the first time since I'd returned, my daughter leaned forward. Just a little. Enough for her head to rest against my shoulder. She cried quietly. "So did I make you come home?" I wrapped both arms around her, carefully avoiding the healing injuries beneath her gown. "No. You didn't—" "I came home because I love you." She whispered something into my shoulder. "I missed you every day." That night, I finally understood something. This hadn't only been physical abuse. Someone had spent months teaching my daughter to doubt her own mother. The bruises would eventually heal. The lies might take years. The following afternoon, I asked Detective Morales for every report connected to the case. He looked uncomfortable. "Some records are missing." "Missing?" "They were never uploaded." "What about school incident reports?" "We're trying to locate them." "What about previous emergency room visits?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Some files appear incomplete." Everything was incomplete. Everything had gaps. Too many gaps. That evening, while walking through the pediatric wing, I happened to meet one of my daughter's second-grade teachers. Mrs. Elaine Carter froze when she recognized me from school photographs. "I've been praying for your little girl." "Thank you." She hesitated. "There were a few times I thought something wasn't right." I waited. "She came to school wearing long sleeves even during 90-degree weather." "What did she say?" "That Grandma said sunshine caused bruises." I stared at her. Mrs. Carter looked ashamed. "I should have asked more questions." "No." I shook my head. "The people responsible wanted everyone to stop asking questions." She nodded slowly. "There was something else." "What?" "Every time I mentioned calling you," Mrs. Carter swallowed hard. "Your husband said military communications were classified and you couldn't be disturbed." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was ridiculous. Daniel knew perfectly well how to reach me through official military channels. He'd done it before. Unless he hadn't wanted me to know. That night, I spread every document across the small hospital table. Medical charts, school attendance, prescription records, insurance claims. Every page told part of the story, but none of them matched perfectly. Someone had been cleaning up behind the truth. As I stared at the growing pile of paperwork, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Lieutenant Colonel Harper?" "Yes." "My name is Frank Donnelly." The voice sounded older. Steady. "I spent 28 years investigating crimes for the Army before I retired." I frowned. "How did you get my number?" "I heard what happened to your daughter." Silence. Then he said one sentence that made me sit up straighter. "I think someone underestimated how many old investigators still believe in doing the right thing." Frank Donnelly didn't sound like the kind of man who wasted words. "I'll be at the hospital cafeteria in 20 minutes, he said. "If you decide you don't want my help, just don't come." Then he hung up. I looked through the ICU window one more time before leaving the pediatric floor. My daughter was asleep, clutching the stuffed rabbit I'd mailed from Germany months earlier. A nurse smiled reassuringly. "We'll call if anything changes." "I'll only be downstairs." The cafeteria was nearly empty. Frank stood as I approached. He looked to be in his early 70s, broad-shouldered despite his age, wearing jeans, work boots, and a faded Army veteran cap. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He extended his hand. "Lieutenant Colonel Harper." "Mr. Donnelly." "Frank." We sat down. He slid a thick manila folder across the table. "I've already done a little homework." I stared at him. "How?" He smiled faintly. "When you've spent 30 years investigating people, you never really stop." Inside the folder were public records. Property records, business registrations, campaign donations, family connections. Every page connected to one name. My husband. Or rather, my husband's family. Frank tapped the first page. "Your father-in-law passed away 6 years ago." "Yes. He spent 20 years as a county commissioner." I nodded slowly. "The family still carries influence." He flipped another page. "Your husband's cousin is an assistant district attorney." Another page. "His uncle owns one of the county's largest construction companies." Another. "A close family friend sits on the hospital foundation board." I looked up. So Detective Morales wasn't exaggerating. "No." Frank folded his hands. "But influence isn't the same thing as immunity." "What do you mean?" "It means people get lazy." I frowned. "They assume nobody will challenge them." He leaned forward. "That's usually when they make mistakes." For the first time since returning home, I felt something besides grief. Hope. Not much. Just enough. Frank looked directly at me. "I read every public incident report involving your daughter. There were only 2. There should have been 6. I stared. "What?" "I spoke with someone who worked at one of the urgent care clinics." He lowered his voice. "They remembered treating a broken wrist last winter." I searched my memory. "Daniel told me she'd sprained it falling off a swing." Frank nodded. "No sprain." He pulled out another document. "Hairline fracture." My stomach tightened. Why wasn't it reported? It was. He tapped the empty space where supporting paperwork should have been. Then someone requested the records. And they disappeared. I looked at him in disbelief. "You think someone destroyed medical records?" "I think someone tried. There was a difference." "Tried. Not succeeded." Frank smiled slightly. "Most people erase the obvious documents. They forget backups." The former investigator had already begun requesting archived insurance billing records. Insurance companies, unlike small clinics, kept everything. Every diagnosis. Every x-ray. Every billing code. Some records couldn't simply disappear. He slid another paper toward me. "This emergency room visit happened 4 months ago." I stared. "I never knew about it." I figured. The diagnosis read, "Suspected rib injury. Disposition. Released to parent. No further investigation documented." I felt sick. "She was hurt while I was in Poland." Frank nodded. "Your deployment schedule actually helps establish the timeline." I blinked. "It does. Every injury occurred while you were physically outside the United States." I hadn't considered that. He continued. "Nobody can claim you caused any of them." For months, I had blamed myself for being gone. Now my military orders became evidence. That realization felt strangely cruel. My absence had protected my innocence, but not my daughter. The next morning, Detective Morales called. "I have an update." "I'm listening." The district attorney declined immediate charges. I wasn't surprised. "What reason?" "Insufficient evidence." I almost laughed. "Despite multiple fractures, they want more." After hanging up, I walked back into my daughter's room. She was sitting up for the first time. Her color looked better. "Mom." "Yeah." "Can you brush my hair?" It was such an ordinary request. I nearly cried. I found the small pink brush in her overnight bag. Slowly, carefully, I brushed every tangled strand. My hair always hurts. I know. Grandma said I cried too much. I kept brushing. "You can cry whenever you need to." She looked at me through the mirror mounted beside her bed. "Really? Especially with me." She smiled. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it was the first genuine smile I'd seen since coming home. Later that afternoon, Frank arrived carrying a laptop. "I'd like to show you something." He opened a spreadsheet. Rows, dates, locations, medical visits, school absences, military deployment records, phone records. He had built a timeline. One red line stretched across 8 months. My deployment. Every injury fell inside it. Every unexplained school absence. Every emergency room visit. Every canceled parent conference. Everything. Like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. Frank leaned back. "Patterns solve cases." I stared silently. "This isn't random." "No. This is systematic." He nodded. So whoever did this had time, had access, and expected nobody to notice. Exactly. That evening, Dr. Bennett entered my daughter's room carrying new scan results. The surgery went well. I exhaled. But she'll need physical therapy. Whatever she needs. He hesitated. There's something else. What? One fracture bothered our radiologist. He pointed to the image. It healed incorrectly. What does that mean? It means treatment was delayed. How long? Several weeks. I closed my eyes. Someone had watched my little girl live with a broken bone and done nothing. I suddenly understood why the surgeon's expression looked so haunted the first day we met. He hadn't simply treated injuries. He had seen cruelty. That night, Daniel finally appeared outside the room. He looked tired. You've been talking to investigators. Yes, you need to stop. I stared at him. I'm serious. He lowered his voice. This is getting out of control. Our daughter has broken bones. They're making assumptions. I stepped closer. Did you know about all the fractures? They were accidents. 6 accidents. His jaw tightened. Kids get hurt. I studied the man I'd been married to for 14 years. He honestly expected me to believe him. I've hired a lawyer, he said. I wasn't surprised. For what? In case this turns into a custody issue. The words hit me harder than anything else. Custody. Our daughter was still in intensive care. And he was already planning court. Frank had warned me. Influential people rarely admitted mistakes. They prepared for lawsuits. I looked Daniel straight in the eye. I haven't even started fighting. He smirked. You don't have much. I almost told him about the insurance records, about the timeline, about Frank. Instead, I simply smiled. No, I said quietly. You just don't know what I have. He walked away convinced I was bluffing. He never noticed Frank standing quietly around the corner. The retired investigator waited until Daniel disappeared into the elevator. Then he handed me a small flash drive. I finally got the archived hospital server back up. Did you find something? Frank smiled for the first time. Oh. He looked toward the ICU. They missed one file. I stared at the flash drive in my hand. Sometimes, justice doesn't begin with a confession. Sometimes, it begins because someone forgets to delete a single piece of evidence. I didn't open the flash drive immediately. Years in military intelligence had taught me one lesson above all others. Never rush toward evidence. Preserve it. Document it. Then let it speak. Frank and I drove to a private forensic laboratory in Raleigh the following morning, instead of plugging the drive into a random laptop. Every step was documented. Every file was copied using proper forensic procedures. Every timestamp was preserved. If this ever reached a courtroom, I wanted no one questioning how the evidence had been handled. The forensic examiner inserted the drive into an isolated computer. A few moments later, folders appeared on the screen. Hospital server backup. Emergency department. Radiology. Nursing notes. One folder immediately caught the examiner's attention. Deleted files auto recovery. Frank leaned forward. Open it. The examiner clicked. Several files appeared. One of them had my daughter's medical record number. Another carried the date from nearly 5 months earlier. He opened it. Everyone in the room became silent. The report described a suspected rib fracture. The attending physician had written, pattern of injury inconsistent with reported fall from bicycle. Another paragraph followed. Recommend immediate Child Protective Services notification. Then, a final line. Status report pending supervisor review. There was no follow-up. No CPS report. No investigation. No explanation. The examiner quietly looked at us. This note shouldn't have disappeared. Frank slowly nodded. No, it shouldn't. For the first time since returning home, I wasn't looking at suspicions. I was looking at proof. Not proof of who had hurt my daughter, but proof that someone had tried to stop the system from protecting her. Detective Morales arrived at the lab an hour later. His face changed the moment he read the recovered report. I've never seen this, Frank answered calmly. You weren't supposed to. Morales looked at me. I owe you an apology. For what? I kept telling you the evidence wasn't there. He held up the recovered report. It was. He looked genuinely angry. Someone buried it. That afternoon, the district attorney's office received copies through official channels. By evening, everything changed. Morales called again. The case has been reassigned. Why? The state attorney general requested independent oversight. I stopped walking. The attorney general, someone higher up saw the recovered records. I looked at Frank. He simply shrugged. Truth has a funny way of climbing. Meanwhile, my daughter continued healing. Physically. Emotionally was another story. One afternoon she watched me reading beside her hospital bed. Mom. Yes. Can I tell you something? You can tell me anything. She looked toward the closed door. As long as Grandma can't hear. I set the book down. Grandma isn't here. She nodded slowly. She used to count. Count the bruises. Every muscle in my body froze. What do you mean? My daughter looked at the blanket. If there weren't too many. She said Daddy wouldn't notice. I felt my stomach twist. She continued speaking almost mechanically, like someone repeating instructions. If I cried? She said crying made everything take longer. I couldn't stop staring at her. Children don't invent details like that. Not 7-year-olds. Not calmly. She reached for the stuffed rabbit. Mom, I'm here. Was I bad? There it was again. That terrible question. The one every abused child seems to ask. I took both of her little hands. Listen to me. She nodded. You were never bad. But Grandma said, I don't care what Grandma said. I gently wiped away her tears. You deserved hugs. You deserved bedtime stories. You deserved to feel safe. You deserved your mom. She started crying. So why didn't anybody help me? I couldn't answer. Because I had been asking myself the same question every hour since coming home. 3 days later, another breakthrough arrived. The forensic pediatric radiologist completed a comprehensive review of every X-ray my daughter had ever received. He projected the images onto a conference room screen. Doctors, investigators, prosecutors, everyone watched silently. He pointed toward one fracture. This injury was approximately 6 months old. Another. 5 months. Another. 3 months. Another. 7 weeks. Every injury carried its own timeline. Its own story. None matched Daniel's explanations. None. The radiologist folded his hands. I can state with reasonable medical certainty, these injuries occurred over an extended period, not from isolated accidents. One prosecutor asked, could a parent reasonably fail to notice? The doctor's answer came immediately. No. Another question. Would the child have experienced significant pain? Yes. Could these injuries occur during normal childhood play? No. Silence filled the room. Medical science had done what opinions never could. It removed doubt. That afternoon, Daniel's attorney requested another meeting. I agreed. We met inside a conference room at the hospital. Daniel looked irritated. His lawyer tried smiling. We believe this situation has become unnecessarily emotional. I almost laughed. Unnecessarily emotional. Our daughter had spent days in intensive care. The lawyer continued. My client remains committed to co-parenting. I looked at Daniel. When exactly? Neither answered. The attorney slid several papers across the table. A temporary custody agreement. I didn't even touch it. My daughter is still hospitalized. Exactly. My client believes stability is important. I looked at Daniel. Did you know she asked whether she deserved to be hurt? His eyes shifted. His attorney interrupted. This meeting isn't about... I raised one hand. It is now. Daniel finally spoke. You don't understand everything. Then explain it. Silence. He couldn't, because there was no explanation. Only excuses. That evening Frank called. I found the babysitter. The one who quit last year. Yes. Will she talk? I think so. The next morning we met her at a quiet coffee shop outside Fayetteville. She looked nervous. Barely 30. She apologized before sitting down. I should have called someone. I said nothing. She took a deep breath. I kept telling myself maybe I was overreacting. Frank quietly placed a recorder on the table. You can start wherever you're comfortable. She nodded, then whispered words I'll never forget. I saw your mother-in-law push her. The coffee shop suddenly felt impossibly quiet. How many times? The babysitter closed her eyes. More than once. Did Daniel know? She hesitated. Then, I told him. My breathing stopped. What did he say? Tears rolled down her cheeks. He told me that children exaggerate. She buried her face in her hands. I quit the next day. I reached across the table and gently touched her arm. You came today. I should have come sooner. Maybe. I looked into her eyes. But you're here now? Frank quietly switched off the recorder. Outside the coffee shop, rain had started falling. For months, my daughter had carried the truth alone. Now, one witness had finally found the courage to carry it with her. And courage has a way of becoming contagious. The courtroom was so quiet that I could hear my daughter's breathing beside me. She wasn't testifying. Not today. Dr. Melissa Grant had recommended against putting a 7-year-old through direct examination unless absolutely necessary. The judge agreed. Instead, my daughter sat in a private family room just behind the courtroom coloring pictures, while a victim advocate stayed with her. I looked through the small glass window before taking my seat. She smiled. A real smile. It wasn't a big one, but after everything she'd endured, it felt like sunlight breaking through months of darkness. I smiled back. Then the bailiff called everyone to order. All rise. The courtroom stood. Judge Rebecca Lawson entered, thanked everyone for their patience, and immediately began the hearing. Unlike the local proceedings that had stalled for weeks, this hearing was now under special oversight from the state because of the recovered medical evidence. No cameras. No reporters. Only lawyers, investigators, medical experts, and the people whose choices had brought us there. Daniel sat at the opposite table. His expensive suit looked perfectly pressed. His confidence did not. Beside him sat Gloria. For the first time since I'd come home, she wasn't smiling. She kept glancing toward the gallery as though looking for familiar faces. There were none. The people she'd always counted on weren't there anymore. One recovered report had changed everything. The state's first witness was Dr. Michael Bennett. He calmly explained my daughter's condition when she arrived at Duke University Hospital. He described the fractures, the burns, the bruising, the dehydration. He never exaggerated. He didn't need to. Facts are powerful when they're true, the prosecutor asked. Doctor, based on your examination, were these injuries consistent with a single accidental event? No. Why not? The fractures occurred over multiple time periods. He pointed to enlarged medical images displayed on monitors throughout the courtroom. This fracture had already begun healing. Another image. This one was recent. Another. This injury was several months old. The prosecutor nodded. So, medically speaking, these injuries were inflicted over time. Yes. Daniel's attorney stood for cross-examination. Doctor, children are naturally active, aren't they? They are. They fall. Yes. They climb. Yes. They sometimes suffer multiple injuries. They do. The attorney smiled slightly. So it's possible, Dr. Bennett interrupted politely. Counselor, active children don't repeatedly suffer fractures in different stages of healing, while also presenting with patterned bruising and untreated injuries. Silence. No further questions, the attorney said quietly. Next came the forensic pediatric radiologist. For nearly an hour, he explained each injury with remarkable patience. Using enlarged X-rays, he showed the jury exactly how bones heal. He estimated the age of every fracture. Every estimate matched one simple truth. I had been deployed overseas, thousands of miles away. The prosecutor asked. Doctor, could Lieutenant Colonel Harper have caused any of these injuries? No. How certain are you? Medically? Yes. Completely. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until then. Not because I had doubted my innocence. Because hearing those words spoken aloud somehow released months of guilt I'd carried alone. Then Detective Ethan Morales took the stand. He admitted something few officers ever publicly admit. I made mistakes. The courtroom became still. I trusted incomplete reports. I believed evidence simply didn't exist. He looked directly toward the judge. I was wrong, the prosecutor asked. What changed? A recovered hospital server backup. The deleted medical report appeared on the courtroom screens. The same report recommending immediate notification to Child Protective Services months before. The prosecutor asked. Would this have changed your investigation? Immediately. The judge looked toward the defense table. Daniel avoided her eyes. Gloria stared down at the floor. Then came the witness I knew would struggle the most. Emily Parker. The former babysitter. She walked slowly to the witness stand, visibly nervous. After taking the oath, she looked toward me. I'm sorry. The judge gently reminded her to answer the questions. Emily nodded. The prosecutor spoke softly. Miss Parker, why did you leave your employment? She swallowed hard. I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. What did you observe? I saw Gloria shove Lily into a doorframe. The room fell silent. More than once? Yes. Did you report it? No. Why not? Emily's voice cracked. I was afraid. Afraid of what? That no one would believe me. The prosecutor paused. Did you ever speak with Daniel? Yes. What did you tell him? I told him Lily kept getting hurt. What was his response? Emily looked toward Daniel. He said, she wiped away tears, children bruise easily. The prosecutor waited. And then, he told me not to interfere with family matters. I closed my eyes. Those words echoed louder than anything else that day. Not to interfere. As though protecting a child were an inconvenience. Daniel's attorney attempted to discredit her. You waited nearly a year to come forward. Yes. So your memory could be mistaken. Emily shook her head. I remember because I still have nightmares. No further questions. Then, Daniel took the stand. He chose to testify. I honestly think he believed he could talk his way out of everything. He looked at the jury. I loved my daughter. The prosecutor nodded. I'll assume that's true. Then she placed a stack of photographs before him. When was this bruise discovered? I don't remember. This fracture? I don't know. This burn? I wasn't there. The prosecutor picked up another document. Hospital records show you signed her discharge papers. Daniel blinked. Another document. School records show you excused her absences. Another. You told investigators these injuries came from bicycles. Another. Then from playground equipment. Another. Then from a staircase. She stopped. Which version is true? Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The prosecutor quietly delivered the question that ended his testimony. Mr. Harper, you've described 6 different accidents. She looked directly into his eyes. Can you explain why none of them actually happened? The silence lasted nearly 10 seconds. His attorney finally stood. No further testimony. Daniel walked back to his seat without looking at anyone. Then Gloria was called. She denied everything, until the prosecutor played a recording. Emily's recorded interview. Then another. A voicemail Gloria had unknowingly left months earlier after calling the wrong number. Her own voice filled the courtroom. She cries until she learns. Gloria's face turned white. I didn't mean... The prosecutor interrupted. What exactly didn't you mean? Gloria started crying. Real tears, but they came years too late. When the hearing ended for the day, I walked back to the family room. My daughter looked up from her coloring book. Is it over? I knelt beside her. The hardest part is, she wrapped both arms around my neck. I knew you'd come back. I held her tighter than I ever had before. I'll always come back. For the first time in many months, she believed me. The judge didn't announce her decision that afternoon. She took the matter under advisement, reviewing thousands of pages of medical records, expert testimony photographs, forensic reports, and witness statements before issuing her final ruling 2 weeks later. Those were the longest 2 weeks of my life. By then, my daughter had finally been discharged from the hospital. The pediatric ICU was behind us. But recovery had only begun. The first night back home, she refused to sleep in her own bedroom. Can I stay with you? She asked quietly, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Of course. She dragged her little blanket into my room, climbed into bed beside me, and fell asleep with one small hand wrapped around my wrist. Almost as if she needed to make sure I wouldn't disappear again. I didn't move all night. Not even once. Every ache in my back was worth knowing she finally felt safe. Physical therapy started 3 mornings a week. Some days she laughed. Other days she cried because simple exercises hurt. One afternoon she became frustrated trying to climb a small set of therapy steps. I can't do it, she whispered. I knelt beside her. Do you remember when you learned to ride your bike? She nodded. You fell. A lot. But every time you stood back up. She looked at the steps again. What if I fall? I smiled. Then I'll be right here to help you stand. She looked into my eyes for a long moment. Then she climbed the first step. Then the second. By the end of the session, every therapist in the room was quietly smiling. Not because she had walked farther than anyone expected. Because she finally believed she could. That mattered more. A week later, Judge Lawson delivered her ruling. Daniel lost primary and legal custody. The court found overwhelming evidence that he had failed to protect his daughter, despite repeated warning signs and documented injuries. His parental rights were not immediately terminated, but any future contact would require strict supervision counseling and compliance with every court order. Gloria received a permanent protective order prohibiting any contact with my daughter. The district attorney also announced criminal charges related to child abuse and obstruction of an investigation. When the hearing ended, Daniel approached me outside the courthouse. For the first time in months, there was no confidence in his face. Only exhaustion. I never wanted this. I looked at him quietly. Our daughter never wanted it either. He lowered his eyes. I should have stopped my mother. Yes, I thought... His voice cracked. I thought she'd never really hurt Lily. I didn't answer immediately. Finally, I said, looking away doesn't make someone innocent. He nodded. I know that now. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was simply the truth, and sometimes truth is the first step toward accountability. Over the following months, I made another difficult decision. After 24 years in the Army, I submitted my retirement papers. Many people assumed I was bitter. I wasn't. The Army had never taken me away from my daughter. People made choices. The Army had given me purpose, lifelong friendships, and the strength to survive the worst day of my life. But now my daughter needed something different. She needed me home. When my retirement ceremony finally arrived at Fort Liberty, several soldiers I'd served beside over the years attended. So did Frank Donnelly. So did Detective Morales. Even Dr. Bennett made the drive. After the ceremony, Frank walked over holding 2 cups of coffee. I've been thinking, he said with a grin. That usually gets people into trouble. He laughed. You know when we first met in that hospital cafeteria? I remember. You looked like you were carrying the weight of the world. I probably was. He nodded toward my daughter who was chasing bubbles across the lawn with several military children. Looks lighter now. I watched her laughing. It wasn't the same laugh she had before. It was quieter. More cautious. But it was real. I think we're both still healing. Frank smiled. That's what healing looks like. Months turned into a year. Therapy continued. Counseling continued. Some nights nightmares still woke her. Whenever they did, she'd walk into my room carrying that old stuffed rabbit. I'm okay, she'd whisper. I just wanted to make sure you were here. I'll always be here. One spring afternoon, while planting flowers together in our backyard, she suddenly stopped digging. Mom, yes. Can I ask you something? Anything? Were you angry? I knew exactly what she meant. When you came home, I thought carefully before answering. I was. Did you want to hurt them? I looked at the tiny purple flowers in her hand. I wanted them to face the truth. Is that the same thing? No. She tilted her head. What's the difference? I smiled. Hurting someone only creates more hurt. What about justice? Justice protects people. She considered that for a long time. Then she nodded. I like justice better. So do I. Years have passed since those terrible days. My daughter is now a confident young woman preparing for college. She volunteers at a children's advocacy center every summer, helping younger children feel safe during forensic interviews. Sometimes parents recognize us from community events. Occasionally, someone asks how I found the strength to keep going. The truth is, I didn't always feel strong. There were nights I wanted to give up, days I blamed myself, moments when anger seemed easier than hope. But I learned something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Real strength isn't measured by how fiercely you seek revenge. It's measured by how faithfully you protect the people you love, even when the road is painfully long. If my story teaches anything, I hope it's this. Never ignore a child's fear. Never assume repeated injuries are just accidents. And never believe that someone's influence or connections place them above the truth. Because lies can hide for a while, but they cannot hide forever. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll share it with someone you care about. You never know who may need the reminder to listen more closely, ask one more question, or speak up for a child who doesn't yet have the words. And if stories like this inspire you, I'd be honored if you subscribed and joined me again for another journey of courage, resilience, and hope. The end.